Hello, hello, hello. Good evening and welcome to Cardinal Dash. I'm Daniel Martinez-Krams, joined as always by Stanford royalty King Jemison. So happy to have you here once again for Cardinal Dash. What better way to end your Tuesday? But this is the time of the year when Stanford fans love to panic. Last year, it was about all of the players that were saying, hey, I'm going to test the waters, I'm going to transfer. There were 16 players that eventually ended up putting their name in the transfer portal. This year, a little bit different storyline with all the players choosing to potentially go to the NFL draft. King, is there some kind of thing going on that we don't know? Why is everyone leaving the Stanford football program?
Well, the conspiracy theorist in me wants to say, yeah, there's something going on. They know something we don't. They know next year's team is going to be terrible. Or, here's the pessimist in me. The money-oriented, personal success-oriented culture of Stanford, not just among the student athletes, but among the student body as a whole, is motivating people to, get rich quick, to strike while the iron is hot. But I don't really think that's what's going on here, particularly not this year. The transfer portal entries, I think, are an inevitable result when a team that has had a run of tremendous success then suffers a tough season, like 2019 was, and when some of those experienced players realize that their roles may be getting taken in the years to come. And so I think that was an isolated event, and I think these draft entries are an isolated event in a different way. I mean, when you look at the 8 guys who've now said that, or I believe 9 guys now, as of today, with Tomas Schaffer entering the fray, the 9 guys who have said that they are leaving early for the NFL draft, 4 of them are fifth-year players. And when you're looking at a fifth-year player saying they're going in the NFL draft, that is effectively them ending their college career at a very expected time, an almost late time. And I don't think it's a certainty that any of those guys are going to get drafted without knowing very much about what NFL draft evaluators think. I believe Malik Antoine and Curtis Robinson at least will likely have a chance to get signed. Maybe Scooter Harrington as well. Tomas Schaffer with his size and with the way he came on the end of the season. Maybe all these guys get a contract, or at least get on a practice squad. But when I hear them declaring for the NFL draft, I'm also hearing they were ready to be done with their Stanford careers. Maybe the grad school element that they'd gotten into is already finished. There wasn't anything for them left to do. Stanford is very different as it pertains to being past your senior year. And with the other guys, only Simi Fehoko was a third-year player who left for the NFL draft. The rest were seniors who Stanford didn't really expect to have around anyway, because if you're a senior and have had a good career after 4 years, you're leaving. And so I just think that these are losses that Stanford expected to sustain. And so they don't worry me about with the future of the program as a whole.
Yeah, I completely agree with you there. I'm not worried. The one thing that popped up is I was looking into Jovan Swan and Dylan Powell, both of whom went to Indiana, and they were talking about just how much they like Tom Allen as a head coach, which is maybe one reason why people would have been transferring last year if they're trying to find a better situation for themselves. But Indiana also finished the season as a top 15 team. They finished number 12, right? So there's people going, and then they're starting at their schools. Jovan Swan had 1 start. Dylan Powell had 3 starts at left guard, 2 starts at right guard. These are people who are going on and playing high-level football. So it's hard to blame anyone for wanting a better opportunity for themselves. And if you look through all those transfer lists, it's all people who found good situations. You can start at the top with KJ Costello. Obviously, it didn't work out as well as possible, but someone who found a situation in which they potentially could have thrived. And if you look at that, then you're saying, you know what? Stanford is actually just preparing people the best way possible. All of those guys last year were graduate transfers. They got their degree. They earned their degree. I think David Shaw kind of voiced his opinion that he would have loved for them to have stayed, to have developed, but it wasn't sure that they were going to see the field consistently in their 5th year. So finishing their education, they went on to the next level. And it's the same thing here with the 2020 NFL draft entrants. Only one of them is really leaving before they graduated. That's Simi Fehoko, who, remember, is 2 years older. So it's someone, again, who's leaving, but also at a somewhat understandable time. He's married. There's all these reasons that you'd want to go on to the next level by that time in your life, where it's not like you're leaving early. I don't think Stanford actually has a problem with retaining people. You go and you look at KJ Costello, who's while at Mississippi State tweeting about Stanford. These are people who still love the program, who are so happy for their time at Stanford. It's not like they're all wanted to distance themselves because they had a bad time. I think Stanford is actually coming out of this on top. It just is frustrating and a little bit scary as a fan when you see, hey, these are guys who may have contributed next year, who could have come back for a fifth or a sixth year because of the rules, but aren't going to come back. Because again, once you're done with your 4 years as an undergraduate, you're not always going to want a little bit more, even at a place as special as Stanford.
Well, and I think right after Stanford's amazing end of the season, right after winning 4 straight, winning the Rose Bowl, fans are thinking, what can we do next year with this roster back, with everybody conceivably able to return? Like, this team's going to win the North. This team's going to, go to the Rose Bowl yet again, the real one. And so I think that there was just a lot of optimism that then has since been tempered by the fact that you do have a lot of the players that you were getting excited about. Well, they've decided to leave, understandably. And I think you brought up KJ Costello. I want to bring him up in a different light. Unfortunately for KJ, the 2019 season was hampered by injuries, and eventually we see Davis Mills take over the starting job. And I think it's very clear that why he transferred was that he knew he was not going to be the starter, or at the very least was going to be in an intense battle with Davis Mills to keep that starting position. Well, he goes on and literally sets the SEC passing record, and this is the conference that has also produced Joe Burrow and Mac Jones in the last 2 years, and Tua and so many other people before that. He sets the SEC single game passing record. The rest of the season is rough. I think you could say that very, very safely say that if KJ Costello had left after the 2018 season, where he threw for over 3,500 yards and was one of the best quarterbacks in the country, that his NFL draft stock would have been much higher than it is now. And perhaps he's even a first or second round guy. Like, he was definitely in that conversation. And I think the same could be said for Bryce Love, another guy who, had he left after the 2017 season, where he's a 2,000-yard rusher, I think that he's almost assuredly a first-round guy. Well, instead, he has the 2018 season where he's hampered by injuries, and has never really been the same player since. We'll hope that he's going to become that player again in the NFL, but we haven't seen it. And so these are guys who stayed 1 year too long. We don't really talk about that enough, about people who stayed 1 year too long. We talk a lot about the people who left 1 year too early and then didn't get drafted or whatnot. But there are definitely people who stay 1 year too long and who don't strike while the iron is hot, and it comes back to bite them.
And I just want to bring this up with Michael Williams, who went to SMU, as school in his home state, and in the off season was working as an essential worker, but basically as an Amazon delivery driver. And that's how he was making ends meet at college in the summer, preparing for the season. Because again, these are college athletes, and a lot of times, this is what Michael Williams brought up, is that as Stanford students, we can see them with their electric bikes and say, oh, that was just given to them. It's not. They're all working for all of these things that they've earned. So at a certain time, you have to leave. It's not just being money hungry or whatever. It's, hey, I am a student. As of right now, I can't profit off of my name, image, and likeness, and I can go on to the next level and do just that. And especially if you're a Stanford student coming off 4 straight wins, you're Davis Mills, you're potentially at the best spot in your career to have left. Could he have come back next year and gone crazy? Certainly. But he also could have regressed in certain respects. I think if you're any one of those players, you've shown enough in college that it wasn't going to change your draft stock that much. Malik Antoine coming back for his 6th year was not going to change how anyone perceived him. Same thing with Curtis Robinson, and probably the same with Drew Dahlman, Foster Sprout. These are all people who have shown their body of work because they have started for a long time. So if you're not going to change any minds in that way, you finish your undergraduate degree, all of them are going to do fine no matter what they choose to do, whether it's NFL or another career, because they got that Stanford degree. So at that point, there's no reason to be scared, except for as a fan, where you're saying, oh, I'm so excited about this 2021 season. Now you're having a lot of newness thrown in your face and you're a little bit worried about that. But that's the only reason that this is a problem at all.
Yeah, and I think that you said it. I mean, none of these guys really have much left to prove. And I think it's interesting. The one person that I actually would say had the most to gain by coming back is the person who's likely to be drafted the highest, and that's Davis Mills. I think that if Davis Mills had come back, he would have been a really push into the first round strongly, almost no matter what he did, as long as he stayed healthy and played fairly well. played anything like the Davis Mills we saw down the stretch this season, just because he hasn't played in as many games. I think the rest of those guys have put together a lot of tape, and they've been, as much in the national spotlight as they're ever going to be. I do think Davis Mills had a chance in his fifth year to potentially be one of the household names in college football. But I also don't blame him. I think what he's counting on is that when people turn on the tape, they're going to say that's an NFL quarterback right there. I don't care that he hasn't played as much. I don't care that he has an injury history. And in fact, the fact that he has an injury history even further justifies the fact that he wanted to leave. And so I think he's going to do fantastic. I just think that he was the one who I see there was more to gain there by coming back. Because even Simi Fehoko, who I don't believe has graduated quite yet, I think for him, he's shown everything he needs to show. Just look at the UCLA game. And, particularly at a position like wide receiver, your shelf life is short. So once again, you've got to get out while the getting's good.
And once again, you're setting me up perfectly on that Davis Mills segue, where we're going to now talk about Tanner McKee. But before we do that, I do want to mention that if you're Davis and you see that Drew Dahlman and Foster Sorrell have just declared, I think that makes your decision a lot easier. He's played under a young offensive line once before, those last 5-6 games of the season when KJ Costello got hurt. Get out. I think he made the right choice. Of course, he could have done more, but now we get the opportunity to see Tanner McKee, one of the top-rated guys in his class where he was one of the last uncommitted guys right along with Justin Fields. Their names are being tossed out together. And it's funny how the world turns around. But now we have Tanner McKee coming in, presumptive starter at Stanford next year. King, where do you see him?
Well, first of all, I want to say that was a fantastic point. I do think that as you saw more and more of those early draft entries roll in, it became more and more clear that that's eventually what Davis Mills was going to do as well. And particularly when you think about that offensive line. But what does the Tanner McKee era look like? I think it looks like a lot of promise for Stanford. You can never know, but this is still one of the highest rated QB prospects Stanford has ever signed. And one of the most highly regarded quarterbacks in a class that included Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence. And he was the number 3 rated pro-style quarterback in that class, top 50 overall prospect. He's 6'6", 228 pounds. So when the NFL people look at that, they drool. And we saw what he could do in his first action as a true freshman. I know that he, came out of high school in 2018, but took a 2-year mission, came back. And so his first game in a Stanford uniform, he played. And that's rare for a quarterback. And he went 3 of 7 for 62 yards, made some really nice throws, including a 46-yard strike to Simi Fehoko that was really, just showed off his impressive arm strength. I remember there was a completion, I believe, on his first throw that didn't count because it happened right as the first quarter ended. But, once again, he showed over and over in that early game that he had all the talent. It just was going to take a little while. He was going to have to get more accurate and get more comfortable with wide receivers. He's going to go into this offseason, we would assume, getting all the first team reps. I mean, probably not all of them. Jack West deserves an opportunity. I think he's going to get that opportunity. And QB competition drives both people to be better. And so I just think that when that comes out, when that's finally over, Tanner McKee is going to be the starter, and it's going to be a bright new day at Stanford. And it's amazing, just to put a bow on it, how this is 3 quarterbacks in a row, 3 starting quarterbacks in a row, and really 4 if you go back to Keller Chris, who are all near 5-star prospects. So Stanford may not be getting the attention as a QB factory, but it is definitely a landing spot for elite quarterbacks.
And just on that, I think there's so many kids who grew up watching Andrew Luck, and they saw Stanford as the place to go to develop as a quarterback, which is really saying something. And I think David Shaw, Tavita Pritchard have only added to that so far. But we got the news today that Ari Patu was going to enroll early at Stanford, which is a shock to everyone's system who's been watching Stanford football. I think they're the last FBS team to have never allowed an early enrollee, and it's only because of this weird pandemic. They've already graduated high school. They're going to be able to go online and take spring classes. But I think that just points to a dichotomy with where Tanner McKee is. Took a 2-year mission and then didn't arrive until the fall because of how weird this season was, where he couldn't really work out in the summer at all. So Tanner McKee arrived so late, but is able to come up and play in his first game. And you know what? He looked all right. clearly not the best. There were some times, again, in that Oregon game where some throws were off. He missed a few at the goal line. I think a really salient point in that game was that both touchdown drives were when Jack West was under center. Again, it's a true freshman in his first game in Tanner McKee, and he did look comfortable. There were some times when he was absorbing pressure in the pocket where he seemed to be able to step up and make some throws. Did he always connect? No, but his chemistry with his receivers is only going to grow from here. And he has some great receivers, even despite the departures. Bryson Tremaine, Michael Wilson, those guys should be great targets for him moving forward. So I think the Tanner McKee era, as you were saying, looks promising. His high school coaches talked a lot about his mobility. Once again, someone like Davis Mills, who isn't going to beat you at his feet, but is going to be able to prick up some scramble yards. And then I saw him even running an option at times, a spread in his high school at Corona Centennial, where he was able to get out in space and run for long distances. This is a quarterback, very, very projectable as an NFL guy, but someone who Stanford can trust going into the future. Obviously, as you were saying, there's going to be a competition with Jack West, as there absolutely should be. But if you're Stanford and you see a guy who has all of this eligibility left, is that projectable? Is this smart? Everyone talks about how talented he was mentally. This is very exciting for your future.
Yeah, and to your point of him as a mobile quarterback, he did set his school record for rushing yards by a quarterback. I think ran for 500 yards one year, 600 another, threw for 3,000 yards as a junior, 2,000 as a senior, and he was in the Army All-American game, was the Polynesian Bowl MVP. I mean, his list of accolades goes on and on. And so I just think he's a guy that Stanford people may not be as familiar with because of just the way his signing worked, where you signed him in the 2018 class, by far the highest rated prospect in that class, but he doesn't join the team until 2020. Similar to Simi Fehoko, it may take him a second, and I think this year it was good that he did not have to be the starter. But similar to Simi Fehoko, I think he's going to burst onto the scene and become an NFL guy pretty quickly. I mean, I think it'll be interesting to see, though, how does Stanford adapt the offense next year? And are they able to sustain the gains that they made this year? We talked a lot about the creativity in the calling this year. It was at an all-time high, and I think it wasn't that Stanford became a spread team. They actually just recommitted to what Stanford has built its program around, and yet they did it in a way that allowed them to get playmakers in space, which is what we see all over college football. You watched last night's national championship game. Alabama won because they have better playmakers and because Steve Sarkisian is a genius at getting those playmakers in space. Well, Stanford did some of that as well, using those easy access yards, just throwing it to Simi Fehoko outside and letting him make a man miss. Tanner McKee's got some of those options next year. I think you got a nice mix of wide receivers. The way I see it, the top four guys are Michael Wilson, Bryson Tremaine, John Humphreys, and Elijah Higgins. Humphreys and Tremaine are going to be deep ball, red zone threats. You can throw a jump ball to them, and they're likely to come down with it. They're big physical guys. Michael Wilson and Elijah Higgins are more those possession wide receivers who are going to be able to find a way to get open over the middle of the field, absorb contact, make people miss. And so I think that's going to be a nice mix. The question is, can Michael Wilson be what Simi Fehoko was this year? Can he be a number one guy, a reliable target to where Tanner McKee knows he can count on Wilson on third down?
And that's what all the Stanford fans are waiting to find out. What kind of offseason work are they even able to get in? I know Davis Mills this past summer talked about he was able to go to LA to meet up with a lot of those receivers because that's where Stanford happens to recruit for most of its receivers. So that's where all those guys, they're at home. He was able to get work in with them. Tanner McKee's already from LA, so you may not be able to have any training camp at Santa Clara County. We'll see what happens. But they'll be there working in the offseason, trying to get a little bit more of that. And I do think, to your point about just getting playmakers in space, where Stanford has recruited the skill positions remarkably well recently, given their overall body of recruiting. There's a lot of guys to be very excited about. Between quarterbacks, as you were mentioning earlier, a lot of run at quarterbacks. But then the receivers, the running backs, there's some guys there. We loved what we saw out of Austin Jones. Just get him the ball. It can be simple, it can be easy, but that's a nice way to get Tanner McKee introduced to the offense next season in what will be otherwise probably another weird year, given all the new pieces that Stanford has to incorporate as they start the Tanner McKee era. And with that, I want to transition over to basketball, specifically men's basketball, to talk about whether or not they're a tournament threat. They've been up, they've been down at different times. They've beaten the teams that they're supposed to beat, but haven't seemed to get over the hill against some of their top-ranked teams. King, is men's basketball a tournament threat?
Well, if the NCAA tournament started today, Stanford would almost undoubtedly be in it. They would also undoubtedly be among the last at-large teams in the field. If you look at Bracket Matrix, which compiles all the bracketologies, and believe me, there are a lot from across the internets, you see that Stanford is on almost every single one of those brackets. Not every single one of them, but they're usually somewhere between a 7 and a 12 seed. And Joe Lunardi, the most famous bracketology, ESPN, has Stanford as an 11 seed. Jerry Palm at CBS has Stanford as a 7 seed. And so there's a lot of variance on what their resume looks like right now. Obviously, the NCAA is going to give deference to the net, the ranking system it came up with, and there Stanford is number 47, and they land there because they're 2 and 3 against quads 1 and 2, which is just a way, if you're not familiar with that, of how the NCAA is going to classify wins. For example, a quad 1 win, as far as I understand it, is beating one of the top 25 teams in the net at home, top 50 at a neutral, top 75, I believe, on the road. And so if you look at those quad 1 wins, it's Arizona and or Alabama and I believe Arizona as the second quad 1 win. And then all of their losses are in those first 2 quadrants with North Carolina, Indiana, and Oregon. Now, of course, Oregon on the road, that's just a loss you expect. Stanford didn't play well in the second half. It was disappointing. Those North Carolina, Indiana losses don't look as good as they did, particularly not when you consider those are 2 of the blue blood programs in the sport. And so that could come back to bite Stanford. But long story short, the way they've started Pac-12 play at 4-1, I absolutely believe this team is trending towards the tournament, and I think they're only going to move up the bracket.
I totally agree with you there. I see this as Stanford easily as a tournament team, just based on what they've done so far. We expect them to get better as the season goes on. But as far as once they get to the tournament, I think there's reasons to have doubt. I think there's sometimes an over-reliance on certain players, Oscar da Silva being one of them, right? Where Pac-12 Offensive Player of the Week, or the Player of the Week last week, had 3 great games, but how much do they rely on him? So far, 3-point shooting has been abysmal. They've taken the fewest in the conference. They're hitting at around 30.8%, which is just poor. Spencer Jones was at 43% last year, 37% this year. All these reasons we are saying, can Stanford, if they're a 7-11 seed, pull off an upset? And I think that's the area of growth for this team. If you imagine last year, they probably would have been once again on the bubble, but probably would have made the tournament. If they've been inching forward every year, this year you expect them to get an NCAA tournament win. Right now, they've obviously been struggling without their backcourt. Not having Dejan, not having Bryce Willis, that's been hurting them for sure. But you look once again, are they able to close games? They had that Oregon game there for the taking. Of course, as you said, it's one where it's on the road. Oregon never loses at home. It's acceptable as a loss, but it's one where Stanford could have won if they closed the right way. That's what it takes to win once you get to the tournament. So as I'm looking forward to the rest of the season for Stanford, you saw how they closed against Washington State. That's what they need to do more frequently, where they go on a 17-2 run or whatever ridiculous thing it was, where they're able to put a lot of distance between them and their opponent at the end of the game. Washington State was able to stay in that game for so long because of 3-point shooting. There's so many areas that Stanford needs to clean up on because their defense is already so good. They have that kind of lockdown. It's just, where do they fit in around there?
Yeah, and I actually think that they've handled the loss of Dejan Davis and Bryce Wills pretty well. And shout out to freshman Michael O'Connell, who has 14 assists and 0 turnovers in his last 3 games. So running the point as a true freshman, he's done a tremendous job and kept Stanford's backcourt afloat. And even without those 2 junkyard dog defenders, who I think make up, when they're healthy, the best defensive backcourt in America, Stanford has been just fine defensively. They're number 9 in defensive efficiency, according to KenPom. But as you said, it's the offense that is holding them back right now. Number 76, according to KenPom. And they're particularly bad in two areas: 3-point shooting, as you mentioned, and turnover percentage. They're number 280 in the country in the percentage of possessions that are ending in turnovers, and that is just killing them. And when you see games like the Washington State game where Stanford does not turn the ball over, they have a really good offense. They do have shooters, and they have a dynamic player in Oscar Da Silva who's really a gravitational player. Like, he's going to suck in the whole defense, and he's still going to score, and he's going to create opportunities for everybody around him. And I'm going to start the Oscar Da Silva Pac-12 Player of the Year campaign now. And I think that he should be the favorite right now. I think if he's not the favorite, you're not watching. And I just think that they need to develop those guys around him. And most of all, they need to stop giving the ball away, and show what these offensive superstars can do. Not superstars, but a lot of really talented players. And the guy I'm looking for to improve over the course of the season is Zaire Williams, who's averaging a little over 11 points per game and has made some, dynamic highlight plays. He had a triple-double against Washington that got him, I believe, the Naismith Player of the Year or Player of the Week award. And yet he still hasn't really come into his own. He's shooting below 30% from three. And I think that number is going to come up over the course of the season. And if he can become a reliable second scorer next to Oscar Da Silva, Stanford is going to be a much more dangerous team come tournament time.
Absolutely agree that Stanford needs Zaire to improve. That 1-2 combo could take Stanford very, very far. And even as you look over this last week, they've done some really impressive stuff. Outscored the three opponents 142-62 in the paint, which is just an absurd stat over 3 games. It shows you that they have some places where they're absolutely dominant. But as you were saying, when you have 4 assists to every 5 turnovers, there's something you're doing wrong as a team. Just sloppy on offense at times, where they could be so much better if they just didn't give the ball away, because they have weapons. They have a lot of shooters, especially on the court. One of the advantages of not having Bryce Willis and Dejon Davis, they've been able to get Michael O'Connell more minutes. They've been able to have Spencer Jones, different guys who can spread the floor, have done a really good job, and you're starting to see things that are exciting for this team. But again, I think they need a quality end of the season, because it's hard to get those quad 1, quad 2 wins playing Pac-12 games. But you have to win games. It seems like they've had a struggle at the end of the year every time I've been following Stanford, that there's something preventing them from staying strong throughout the year. And obviously it's so tough to be on the road right now. They're going through something that really no other team is. But it's how they're able to finish is going to determine where they're set up for the tournament and if they're able to get a win or two when it comes time for March.
Daniel, you need to eat crow on your Pac-12 disrespect. That's ridiculous. There's so many quad 1 and quad 2 opportunities in this league. Case in point, the next 6 games for Stanford are going to be in quad 1 and quad 2. And so they're going to have a chance to bolster that resume. And I actually think these next 3 weeks really will determine to me where Stanford's going to end up come Selection Sunday, because you got the Utah and Colorado schools on the road. Colorado is, around a top 25 team, and obviously would be a quad 1 win on the road according to the net. Utah, just because of being a difficult place to play, also I believe a quad 2 win according to the net. Then you have the LA schools, both of whom are playing well at home in Santa Cruz, and then you go on the road to face Arizona and Arizona State. Something like 4-2 in that stretch would set up Stanford beautifully for the rest of the season. 3-3 or worse, and you're going to have to pick up some wins down the stretch. And 5-1 or better, and Stanford's probably ranked at the end of that. And so, yes, the Pac-12 has gotten some disrespect, and I think it's ridiculous that there are so few ranked teams in this league. But there's going to be 4 to 5 tournament teams coming out of the Pac-12, and Stanford's about to play a few of them. And so I think that this is going to be a really critical stretch. Can the Cardinal compile wins? Obviously, they might not be in Maples Pavilion again this season. Are they able to get through that and to continue to win on the road, even if it's technically a home game? And personally, I'm really excited for the USC-UCLA weekend, because you're going to see Evan Mobley go up against Zaire Williams. And I know that these head-to-head matchups aren't necessarily as big as we build them to be for NBA draft stuff, but it's still going to be really fun to see 2 of the top 5 freshmen in the country going against one another. And I think that this mountain road trip is also just a really critical stretch for Stanford. Two beatable teams, two teams that they're better than, but do they have the fortitude to, as you say, close games and win on the road?
Appreciate you putting me in my place there, King. I needed that. Please follow us at Dash Sports TV on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Watch and subscribe on YouTube. Listen in podcast form on Spotify, and check us out online at Dash Sports TV. That's all for this week on Dash Sports on Cardinal Dash. For King Jemison, I'm Daniel Martinez-Krams. Please have a good night.